So we will start with Dr. Verena Busser, a PhD from the University of Potsdam and in the Department of Applied Sciences and affiliated researcher here in our college. Her research, I'm reading what was given here, and she is affiliated with Dr. Boaz Cohen, who presides the unit for the study and research of the Shoah. Her research focuses on the areas of Hachshara and non-Zionist immigration preparations, childhood and youth during and after the Shoah, and Jewish functionaries under the Nazi rule. Dr. Busser's work was supported by the Memorial Foundation for Jewish Culture and the Leo Baeck Institute in New York and the Hadassah Brandeis Institute in Waltham. Her PhD dealt with the survival of children in camps and was published in 2010. She published on child research in the aftermath of World War II and Hachshara and non-Zionist immigration training. Her paper about
Atlit.
Atlit immigration camp will be published in this year or during this year in the UK in a volume about
British internment.
Internment camps. Internment by the British, which is Atlit during World War II, by the
Rachel Pistol and Gillica.
Pistol and Gillica. Okay, so now I said everything,
yes.
And you have at least half an hour.
Yes, but relax, I take 2 hours. I have enough time now.
Yes, after I said that. Okay,
so
please.
we make an analysis, a picture analysis, and no. And don't be afraid, it's not longer than half an hour. Yeah. Yes, so thank you for the introduction and also thank you to Chaim. Thanks a lot for the invitation. My first travel after 2 years was COVID. Yeah. And yes, I would like to present you today my first research steps into the detention camp at Atlit. And now, today and yesterday, we discussed more the, let's say, highest political levels, and now we go more to the grounds of the mandate and the question, which was also in the background from the British perspective, how to administrate a mandate and occupation. And in my eyes, Atlit was definitely an instrument of mandate administration against the background. We make a jump now. We add 17 years to the 22 white paper of the British white paper as of 1939. In the years before, the mandate power had, according to Israeli researcher Anita Shapira, unsuccessfully tried to implement an appeasement policy with the means of subdividing Palestine into an Arab and Jewish state. And yes, I came to Atlit because, as you mentioned before, I'm researching about Zionist and Hachshara in Nazi Germany and non-Zionist immigration training. And I found in many, of course, survivor testimonies, everything, details about their imprisonment in Atlit. So, and then last year I was not asked, I was pushed to write something about Atlit, and I was very grateful because I enjoyed the research very much, yes. And I thought, at least in Hebrew there must be a broad body of research literature about Atlit. But then I found, let's say it like this, researchers like Yehuda Bauer, Dalia Offer, and so on, everybody wrote about Atlit, but it was everywhere, but somehow yet nowhere. So I thought maybe I was interested, when was it opened? How many people, who were the prisoners, and so on. I didn't find anything. And COVID didn't make it easier, because you have to annoy all the archivists to send something online, digital copies, and it's not everywhere. I mean, in Israel it's quite easy, but in other parts of the world, like in Germany, it's not easy. Yes, and the only publication which I found was by Mordecai Naor, Zionist. This book was very interesting, which I ordered at the in Jerusalem at the, how is it said, not State Library? National Library, yes, National. A story, the Atlit camp, a story of a time and a place. And I was very grateful because this was the only publication, but I have to say you cannot find anything about the construction, about the history, about, I don't know, what we as historians, it's definitely 100%, everything is about Zionist rescue efforts, liberating the prisoners and so on. And only one researcher in the UK is at the moment researching on British internment camps more generally. Her name is Ileana Haji Savas. I don't know how to pronounce her name, but she just received a 5 years project about to research all the internment camps and detention camps in the Mandate, but also in North Africa. So when I started last year, my first address was, of course, the Atlit Information and Research Center. They've sent a lot of materials. Then the Ghetto Fighters, Yad Vashem archives. What was interesting, we have in Germany a database funded by the German Research Foundation where you can approach files from the National Archives in Kew, means from the mandate government, from the police forces and administrative reports from the
Colonial Office.
The Colonial Office, from the Public Works Department, which was luckily introduced to us yesterday by RINA, the Public Works Department, Israel State Archives, the Weizmann Archives, the Palestine Gazette is online, the Palestine Post is online, and all the oral history testimony collections which are available to researchers. This is what I used, and what I found especially interesting was this, this is why I asked you yesterday about the British policemen, the British Mandate Palestine Police Oral History Project at the St. Anthony's College in the UK in Oxford. And this, by the way, is an interesting collection. They have more sources about the later Mandate, but it's also interesting to get, from the British perspective, an overall impression about the general atmosphere. Yes, I mean, they are from time to time anti-Semites, they are not objective, they are arguing from their own individual point of view, but nevertheless it's an interesting source project. So, my methodological approach against the background, and I will say something about this later when I found this book by Naor, and I have been in Atlit 2 days ago for the first time, I have to say, and I mentioned it only very shortly, is that it's very dominating is this narrative produced by Zionist leaders, contemporary witnesses, sources, and so on. We had this yesterday when Chaim said it's always the question of who needs to remember what, and the question of audience. And in my eyes, until today, the story, which is not yet told, of course, it's a story of success of Zionism. And I found it interesting because when I have been to Atlit and you see the model of the camp, they, the history is introduced. I heard the terms, I heard what the speaker is saying, and they used the book by Naor, and it's something like the refugees were begging to enter Palestine and so on. So it's very one-sided. Yes, and I already said about this, this until today, the events, especially about 1945, are mentioned in the camp, have been used to manifest and create a strictly Zionist narrative. For example, when Mach fighters under leadership from Yitzhak Rabin broke into the camp and managed to free more than 200 women and men, or the so-called Black Sabbath operation, or Operation Agatha, was it called by the British, the military action by the British in 46 against Palmach and Haganah fighters. So I would like to widen a little bit the historical perspective, and I was interested in aspects of social and cultural life while living in an interim situation. And where have I the slices missing? So doesn't matter. I want to deal more with the so-called gnawing narratives. So the narratives which sometimes contradict or dispute the official collective memory. So I will not read the quote now to you, but I also use the approach by British researcher Peter Gatrell, because I think in the cases where refugees are investigated, they are usually, and this is also the case for Atlit, portrayed as an unnamed mass, passive victims of persecution, war, or historical events as such. So we learn about what is done for them and not as what is being done by them. So I have So he was my inspiration in the end. We talked about the question of inspiration yesterday. You mentioned it, and this is why I put this slice in. He was my inspiration. He died. His name is Gideon in Hebrew, and he died 2 years ago because of Corona. And he was one of the German Jewish refugees. He was from Berlin, and he went to a Zionist Hachshara in Nazi Germany. He was not a Zionist at all, and he also survived the Patria disaster. And one day, when I had many talks with him and interviews and hours of sitting together without saying anything, which is sometimes more interesting, he was sitting in his chair. By the way, I have time. He got the chair from a German friend, and he was sitting there. We were sitting above the Haifa Bay and saying nothing. And he one day said, "Come on, I show something to you." And he, for the rest of his life, he was a worker in the Haifa airport. And then he said, "Come on, I'll show this tablet to you." And then one day they were diving. I don't know. I mean, he was already 98 years old. But he was diving for the main remains of the Patria. And this is still in his family's possession. It was a tablet from the ship. I never understood what this stamp is here. So when somebody sees what it is, I think it's a crown, but I'm not sure. So he was my inspiration to know more about Atlit, because he was among the people who stayed there for more than 1 year. So I start what I found out now. So the camp in Atlit was, from the British perspective, illegal Jewish immigrants, was based on the so-called Palestine Defense Order as of 1937. I don't know, but where? Here, which you can hear, and which is said, any person who is found in Palestine in contravention of the provisions of the immigration ordinance shall be guilty, and so on, and shall be detained. What we can see here also, we had this question yesterday because someone asked, were there not any Arab illegal immigrants? Yes, they were, and you find it in the Palestine Force administrative report, for example, as of 1938, and you see the numbers. So, as you know, the background for Atlit was that the quota was set to 1,500 visas per month up until 1944. And of course, all of you know, the Zionists in the Yishuv and in Europe tried to undermine this policy of the colonial power and had initiated already in 1934 the Aliyah Bet. So what I think, sometimes it's not clear, the camp was opened in December 1939 and operated for the large mass of refugees until December 46. But because from 46 onwards, the illegal immigrants were deported, transferred to Cyprus, but in Atlit there were still sick immigrants and pregnant women. They were left there. Yes. So originally the camp was planned for 2,000 detainees, and 500 Jewish and Arabic employees worked on the erection of the campsite. In Atlit then, in the end, not only illegal immigrants were screened, but also they were interrogated to filter out assumed spies. Suspected men were often transferred to the detention camp in Zarafand, which was a former Arab village south of Haifa, or to the military prison in Akko, and women were transferred to Bethlehem. And the prisoners were watched by Gafirim, a Jewish police unit that was under British law in order to protect the Jewish settlements, and salaries were paid by the British. And I would like to add that there are some memories of former British policemen, and this is a book by, his name is Alfred Wehre, and he was one of the guards who took the refugees from the ships to Atlit. And here you see what he said. They came ashore under guard, and after landing each one knelt and kissed the ground. What a sad sight. And the people were filthy, ragged, no change of clothing, they had nothing. And he also speaks a lot about the prejudices of the refugees against the British police and so on. Where do I made this? So now I lost my. Okay, but doesn't matter. So we start now with the refugees arriving in 1939, especially with a focus on 1940, and for the Germans, the German Jewish refugees, about whom I will tell you a little bit more now. Atlit was the first encounter with Eretz Israel, which means the promised land, what was promised to them in Germany. And this was not usually or necessarily what they found here. I will focus now on the passengers of the so-called, in the Palestine post, so-called death ships, Atlantic, Pacific and Milosh. This is only for your information, for the background with regards to numbers. Yeah. Quite a few of them wrote their memories and diaries about leaving Europe and involved conflicting feelings. This was very interesting. Their voyages and their imprisonment in Atlit. For example, how did they regard British authorities, and how did the refugees live in this uncertain situation between their threatening past and unknown future? In my eyes, these are the sources, their ego documents, and widen the historical narrative and enhance an approach which has turned the Atlit camp retrospectively into a symbol of the struggle of the Zionist movement against the British. And when I was 2 days ago in Atlit, it was interesting. A friend of mine was with me, and when they said to us, yeah, we cannot enter because due to COVID we have to register. And then she said, yeah, but okay, she came from Germany, she wants to do some research. And the woman at the desk said, why research? We know everything. This was interesting, but I don't know if it's a joke, didn't seem so, but in the end, we could enter. So for the former Jewish detainees, Atlit also represented their fears and destroyed hope, suffering while awaiting an unknown future, separation from families. They were living in Atlit in a status in between, not Europeans with a national identity anymore, and not yet Jews with a new homeland. With the later Holocaust survivors of deportation, camps and ghettos, they had one thing in common. They were stuck between powerful forces, many of them making decisions on their behalf. So it are the questions of day-to-day life of refugees which are in the center of my research. They differ, the early memories from these refugees of those from the Holocaust survivors. Because, for example, I read some later testimonies, and they were actively fighting the British. They had to throw their belongings on the policemen and so on, only to give you one example. So when Atlit was opened in 1939, this is everyday life, Alltagsgeschichte, some of the construction works began already in early August 39, and sometimes it's a little bit, it is said it's based on the defense order. So, okay, I will come to that. The construction works began in early August 39 on an area of 150 dunam. These were approximately 150,000 square meters. On December 3, 39, the Palestine Post officially announced that the new Atlit camp was completed in the record time of about 110 working days. End quote. Then it comprised 60 huts with dormitories, kitchens, dining halls, hospital bay, sanitary facilities, and could accommodate indeed 2,000 detainees. And at that time there was also nearby a so-called labor camp from the jail prison labor camp number 2, which in my eyes was also used to house detainees, but it was nearby and near the sea. Installation works were carried out under the supervision of the district medical officer, and building materials came from nearby Haifa, delivered by Arab and Jewish supplier companies. However, the British authorities referred to Atlit as a clearance camp. So this meant it served as a quarantine and detention site for the refugees, both illegal and legal, from Nazi-occupied Europe, before the actual immigration procedures took place. Because, as all of you know, among the most severe problems in Mandate Palestine, and this is also mirrored in the Palestine Gazette and in the Palestine Post, was the challenge of controlling infectious diseases like malaria, jaundice, typhoid fever, cholera, or rabies, as can be read in these numerous pages in the contemporary press. And indeed, at the end of 1940, typhoid broke out, and one of the young refugees died there, which was said in the press. So what you see here is part of the cultural everyday life. It's a children's book by artist Lea Grundig. She was an artist then, she was not yet an artist. And Lea Pfefferkorn. We don't know who Lea Pfefferkorn is, but probably a friend of hers. And it's a children's book in Atlit with the title Der Scheinwerfer. What is Scheinwerfer in English? This thing here.
Floodlight.
Yes, of Atlit. So, where, apart from survivor and refugee survivor testimonies, the most historic details I found in the contemporary press, as mentioned before. After the Patria disaster, in March 1941, official authorization was given for prisoners. This means only 4 months after they came to Palestine, Mandate Palestine, to receive visitors, including officials of the Haifa rabbinate. We have detained refugees asked visitors to send them toothpaste, soap, shaving cream and razors, as well as cigarettes and reading materials. Private visitors were not yet allowed, only some weeks later. They had connections to the Czechoslovak Settlers Association or the German and Austrian Settlers Association in Haifa. Many former inmates testify in their ego documents about a vivid cultural life, despite their uncomfortable and uncertain situation. For example, in March 41, there was a commemoration at the occasion of the 91st birthday of former Czechoslovak President Thomas Masaryk in Atlit, and also some consuls were allowed to visit the refugees. In January 1940, a kosher kitchen operated in the camp, and the refugees received Shabbat materials, books, and papers. And this is, for example, part of a diary in the US HMM archives in Washington. It's a, let's say, 100 pages diary from someone Egon Weiss, who came originally from Austria. And this is interesting because he drew a map of the camp, yes. For example, I learned from this map that the Gaferim, they were responsible from the interior of the camp. Outside were the British. And these are the sources which I find so fascinating, because his diary really comprises the time when they left Europe. He made every day, he wrote something into his diary, how they went from Slovakia, Romania, Greece, and so on. And he tells us about what were the discussions about within the community or assumed community. Then when they were transferred to the Patria, then normally you read everywhere they were transferred to the Patria, but then I learned, for example, from sources like this, what were the discussions among the refugees? Do they want to use force against the British? Do they not want force? They went on a hunger strike and all these things. So, yeah, this is only one example. And then 2 or 3 months after the Patria was bombed and sunk in the Haifa harbor, there were 17 infants in Atlit who had been born in Bratislava already, or on one of the refugee ships. At this time, I found out 128 children were under the age of 14 years, and additionally 100 teenagers under 18 years of age. So Jewish organizations sent supplies for the children to Atlit, for example, that it was possible to school them or to set up some kind of kindergarten for them. The kindergarten was led by someone who was originally from Berlin, Marianne Burstein, a trained kindergarten teacher. She worked in Atlit in the barracks for mothers. So the children received from Jewish organizations footballs and sports equipment, were taught Hebrew, mathematics, sports, and German. And the school, when I say they were taught Hebrew, mathematics, and so on, was led by someone who was a Kinderarzt, pediatrician, thank you. Dr. Ella Freund from Germany. This is a photo of a friend of her, the son of a friend of her gave it to me. And in the Atlit archives, they have the school journal. Then you see that the children were taught again Hebrew, literature, and as I mentioned, math and other things. Yes, and interesting was also that a part of everyday life, of course, the refugees were young men, young women. They found love and their life partners, and these couples started to making future plans in Atlit. At least 2 weddings took place in the camp, during which fellow prisoners had, there's a nice description in a diary, prayer shawls above the couple to celebrate the wedding. And the wedding as such was celebrated in the office of the police officer in charge of the camp and representatives of the refugee community joined the ceremony. So in the camp was, do I still have time?
Yes.
I'm getting tired too. So now after lunch, how much time is left?
10 minutes.
10. Okay.
Too much?
No. Okay, I speak shorter, yes. I found this picture so nice, Ella Freund, yes. Very impressive woman. And this, by the way, is, I just received this some weeks ago from, I mentioned this kindergarten educator Marianne Bach-Burstein. I received this poem from her family in the United States, and she wrote a poem, Marianne wrote a poem for her friend Charlotte. And I will not quote it because when I translate the poem into English, it's not funny anymore. But you see, she picks up what happened in the past, the Patria, drowning of people, transfer to the camp here.
It's okay, it's not you.
Yeah, the transfer was, here the transfer was the buses on the back, and yeah, it's a nice picture, poem about desperation, hardships. There was bombing, yes, of the Patria, and the people jumped into the sea, and it was not funny, and so on. But this is so nice because, and her family, by the way, has some, I forgot the English word, some remains from the Patria still in their possession too. And the Jewish Agency, by the way, this is why you find so many sources also in the Central Zionist Archives, was active in the camp and responsible for the cultural and cultural life in the camp, social life? No, social life not. And the Zionist Immigration Bureau chose men from among 530 immigrants who came from Berlin for their specific professional qualifications. Some of them joined later the British Army and went to Egypt and so on. However, if I focus on the social life, on the cultural life and so on of the first big group of refugees, of course we may read accounts of the kindergartens, love, weddings, but I think we always have to remember that the young people in the camp had been forced to part from their parents or their relatives or their friends or from their homeland because of the Nazi persecution. Some felt, or many of them felt guilty about planning their future while their relatives in Germany or Austria or Czechoslovakia were threatened with deportation. Their letters and postcards, many of the postcards were sent through the Red Cross, which means it was censored and only short sentence, but nevertheless they exist. Anyway, their letters and postcards tell us much today about their personal sufferings and needs, as well as the happy times which also existed in the camp. So I come to close now. Today, the former detention camp in Atlit served is one of the symbols of the, as I said it before, of the struggle of the Zionists against the British. Two intertwined ideologically charged narratives converge here: Palestine as the homeland of the Jewish people, and the fight against the British colonial power, which conducted a war on immigration against the Jews. The historical narrative is that of the Zionist enterprise, where they took place, and I quote from the publication by Mordecai Naor. I quote, "A war between the Jewish refugee standing on a deck of a ship attempting to reach the shores of Palestine after," this is about Holocaust survivors now, "after surviving the Holocaust, and the British Royal Navy, which had closed the gates. It had been a contest of the weak versus the strong, David against Goliath," end quote. Yet, in my eyes, the actual experience of the refugees and also the survivors, their fears and hopes, their further life paths are still unwritten, as well as parts of the camp history as such. For example, in 1948, it housed Yemenite Jewish refugees, then Arab prisoners of war, and the files about Arab prisoners of war can be accessed online, the Red Cross files, and and also 48 war, but also during the 67 war, you can see the files online. Yes, the Yemenites, Arab prisoners of war, and the third thing I forgot now what to say. So, but anyway, thank you.
I have actually two questions. First of all, I read the research about the Cyprus case. So it looks very much alike. You know, the whole social life. I don't know if you have an idea about that, but Cyprus was the prototype of Atlit.
Yeah.
Okay? In many aspects. Number two, were you able to maybe you encountered an incident during this time that the commander of Atlit was killed with his family? They attacked the commander, and it was a big issue there.
So I start with the last question. I mean, I had there was one commander. His name was Wade Wilson. Yes.
No, Jewish one, Moshe.
Yeah, but this was not the camp commander of Atlit. Then maybe from the Gafarim, but the camp commander was British.
Yes, he was the commander of the so-called guard.
The what?
Close to the
I didn't understand it.
The guard.
Probably the commander of the Galilee.
The
Jewish guard within the camp.
Yes.
I did not yet find it. I only found that some of the captains of the ships were put on trial by the British, or for, I don't know, trafficking or whatever charges. And the other question was, sorry, again?
I'm talking about the Cyprus.
Yes, Cyprus. What I don't understand is why you say Cyprus was the prototype.
No.
You said Cyprus was the prototype. Aha, you meant it. You meant it the other way around. So, yeah, okay, but I don't know the construction plans for Cyprus camps, and it was, of course, a much bigger dimension because there were summer and winter camps. And yes, and you don't. And I think it's. I can come here. I think it's not known yet where in Cyprus exactly every camp was, because this is what they told me 2 days ago in Atlit. Because they still try to find out where the actual campsites were. So I would not say it was a prototype for Cyprus. What I would say, without knowing it, without seeing any source, what you mentioned today, yesterday, I think it was you, that there was a prototype, if at all there was a prototype, something in Ireland, or I don't know, but yeah.
Well, that's actually a question I can ask, because in 1922, white paper, as I said yesterday, was in context of many, many things. and a decision maker as well as an implementer does not in his mind separate it. So I brought the whole picture, including Ireland and India and what have you. My question about detention camps goes back even further, because it's well known that the British of the 20th century were probably the first to detain civilian women and children.
But not in the Middle East, in
South
Buren,
Africa.
Buren,
In
South Africa, the
in
Buren,
1900,
yes.
1902.
Yes.
So I would say it was the prototype conception of detaining civilian women and children, non-combatants, part of a longer-term thought process that Atlit, Cyprus was just a continuation of that thought process, and there was nothing exceptional about the fact that there was Jewish immigration or that was Palestine, but it was just part of the psyche of what one could do to perhaps demoralize anyone in order to subjugate and impose your authority upon them, and that is the women and the children. Which, if conceptually, you could even take back to Greek warfare, because Thucydides mentioned the fact that the Greeks, as victors, would enslave the men, castrate the boys, rape the women, and therefore, within one generation, the conquered are no longer in any way ethnically there anymore. So the question really is, if we're going to look backwards as prototypes for this, and the real question is, what is the purpose? If in 1922 you're not colonizing, you only have a mandate to bring about self-determination, what is the point of having women and children in a detention camp? Or is the fact that in your mindset you are in kind of a war mindset that you will eventually go in a different direction from what the policy is stated of just self-determination? It's a big issue.
This is why I give you this look now, not a yes or no. No, but what you say is right, because as mentioned earlier, my PhD was about children in the camps, and I read for this, I don't know, 15 years ago, a publication about camps in South Africa, the Buren. And in this publication, I read only one, because it was not my topic, but then there it is said, yes, we did this and that in South Africa, but one thing we did not do, we did not imprison women and children, which is not true in the end, yes? And so this was, by the way, later on one of the justifications from a German concentration camp where they housed women and children. They put it the other way around. So I don't know. How can I find out if South Africa was the prototype for Atlit? I mean, it was a camp with barbed wire, with facilities, with disinfection, and this. Yeah.
It's not only a British. The idea of a detention camp.
1901.
I know the book. This story I know, but I'm saying that in the world of the 30s, the idea of a detention camp for families, you see it in Switzerland, you see it in Spain, you see it in France itself, before it's... the world accepted this already as something very standard, that a government puts unlawful citizens, families, children in camps. This was like a world standard. Actually, when Verena started this project, they were talking about doing a whole, trying to show the whole kaleidoscope of refugee internments, because it's actually a global story. It's not only a British story, although they really have the first. I will say just one thing. I'm now doing a research in the project. Verena and I are cooperating. We have this project called Children of War, Holocaust and Genocide. And I'm working now on educating children in detention camps. So I'm actually looking at the Atlit camp and how Holocaust survivor children were educated in the Atlit camp. So this issue of
That goes back to Thucydides in Greek warfare, because the teachers in ancient Greek were the slaves.
okay.
But I have to say with the detention, yes, that these people who came from the Patriarch and were among the first groups, this was the only group, if you can say, that was housed there for more than 1 year. All the others were there for a shorter period.
Yes, that's important to mention.
This is important, yes, because and then they had this schedule here, for example, but later on, I think they also educated the children, but 44, 45, it was different, because then they were the Zionists. This were actually,
But
I mean,
if
she
you
was
were there for a shorter period,
sorry?
you were for a shorter period, where did they go?
To Palestine. They
But
were
they-
they
so they're
left
free,
on
huh?
this
They
proper
were free.
basis.
Yes.
Put the next year's quota.
I mean, free. They, what I found in the testimonies is that they were actually they were free, but then there were people. No, they were from the kibbutz movement. They
Yes,
came
they
and
came
said
and spread them all over the kibbutzim.
yes, but there were many who said no. Now I'm actually free. I came from Germany. I was more than or at least a year in Atlit, and I don't want to go to kibbutz now. I want to see Palestine. I want to see this and this and that. Yeah, and. Others went to Egypt as soldiers. They were
Yes.
recruited for the British Army, yes.
Okay.
And they, yeah.
There's one more question.
I just wanted to make a suggestion that we can put the whole idea of a camp in inverted commas in a theoretical perspective. The first person to write about camps is Bruno Bettelheim.
Sorry?
Bruno Bettelheim.
Bruno,
Wrote
yeah.
about camps and camp life very early on, I think immediately after the war. There's also an important work by sociologist Erwin Goffman, what he calls total institutions. The total institution is designed to control your life 24 hours a day, firstly, and secondly, in inverted commas, to improve you. If you look at he isolates about 20 different kinds of behavior responses on the part of the inmates and of the supervisors or the controllers. I think you'll find that one or two of the things you pointed out are actually
Yeah, but I think
universal or very common responses to incarceration.
But
And
as
to think-
yeah, sorry.
One more sentence.
Yeah, yeah.
And to think only of it as an internment camp, I think, is a little bit restricting. You have to look at it as an institution that's fulfilling at least a bureaucratically justified social function.
But I think in the beginning it was not planned as an internment camp. This is why it said clearance camp. Clearance camp?
Clearance.
Yeah, clearance, clearance. So they were, I mean, their passports were checked, their certificates, their visa, and so on. It was never, I think, planned that they would stay for a year or so. Yes? This is maybe something different than the total control. Yes?
But when they were there, then it'd be interesting to look if they used the same mechanisms to ensure.
Yeah, but the interior structure was built or planned by the Jewish agency, and later on kibbutz movements came in, and with the Holocaust survivors, it 44, 45 and onwards, it was again different. Yeah. So actually, I have to do check the Jewish agency file.
Two remarks from me. One of our graduates is the director of this camp, Zavit Rothenberg. You should speak to her. She's a very gifted girl. She has been doing, and one of the big things she did was to collect 40,000 videos of survivors of the camp. Some of them have died ever since, and they are still interviewing. And she built up a huge archive in Hebrew, I suppose, mostly, or maybe some in German. You can check it.
Yes.
So she has an archive, and it's one of the leading institutes of the Council for.
But they have no English captions on the exhibition in the camp. So this is
Yeah, which is
something
very bad. That can be improved. But at least she has the archive, and they managed to create when I speak about the museum experience, a very moving visit, especially for kids, with the film on the ship, which you saw maybe. The video.
It was closed.
Oh, you have to see it.
Yeah.
There is a ship, there's an airplane. They invested
This
a lot of
I
money
saw,
in
but
this
not the
site.
movie.
Yes,
Yeah, but
the
ship
movie is
but the ship-
quite a Zionist movie. You know, it ends with Atikva, and But it's okay. It's
But
a
the ship came from Latvia.
the ship is a fishing ship from the Baltic Sea, but which is
Yeah.
similar to one of those
I know,
ships.
yes.
So
And what
whoever
I-
doesn't know it, please go and visit Atlit,
Yes.
which became a very, very interesting site. I would say that the truth is in the middle. You have to judge it, first of all, as a detention camp in the political context of British rule in Palestine, which was very cruel. You cannot detach it was from the Holocaust, of course.
No, no.
But you can judge it also, if you want to make a historical comparison, with other detention. I think it will be difficult to compare. But the context which hits everybody who visits there of incarcerating people who have just survived the Holocaust is quite cruel
Yeah,
in any respect.
But it began before the Holocaust.
Sorry?
No, this is before the Holocaust,
Before the Holocaust.
not
Yeah,
before
it began
the...
before, but it
No,
continued.
those documents are before the Holocaust.
Of course, yes.
These are from 1939, 40, and so on.
Yes.
And what I learned also when I was in Atlit, that they sent decades ago already, I think, they sent out questionnaires with the electricity bills to ask people for their experiences.
Uh-huh.
And
I think-
it was not very successful because she said there was a list at the electricity companies who were the Holocaust survivors, because you cannot say, not every Israeli received this, and they sent out these questionnaires.
Oh.
It was nice.
So I suggest to speak to her. I will give you her telephone.
Yes.
Call her, and when you're here again, with pause and go in. She has a lot of documents. Maybe she can help you with the continuation of the research. Any more?
You mentioned Cyprus, but wasn't there also something about, was it Madagascar?
Sorry?
Is it overflow from
Mauritius,
Cyprus?
Mauritius.
Always.
Mauritius.
Sort of
Ah.
exportation, how do you say?
Yeah.
No, expatriation.
Another one.
But there were camps on the Mauritius as well, weren't there?
Sorry?
They were not taken to Mauritius.
No,
No, part of the...
You have refugees in Mauritius, you have research by
I wanted to tell Charlotte
now
about
the
it.
expert on
Mauritius.
people in Mauritius, not the inmates of the camps, not the resistance fighters, but
Yes.
generally Jews who escaped Europe. There's a whole community now, they are building a museum for this community in Mauritius.
Yes.
Yeah.
The
The
people
camps
who
in Mauritius or was
What
it
do we get?
open?
it was
No,
open.
Open.
They were deported because this one ship, Atlantic, part of the passengers came already to the Patria, yes? So, and the other ones still were on the Atlantic. So, and when the Patria was bombed and sunk, those who jumped and survived the disaster were regarded as people who survived Seenot.
Yes.
Yes.
Disaster at sea.
And the
yes,
others
yes.
who were not
Submarine.
yet there were deported to Mauritius. And they were housed before their deportation separately in Atlit. And then one day everything was closed down in the camp, and the British came and then by force deported them. Investigated them first, I think, in Akko, and
Yes.
then to Mauritius.
When you go there, try to be guided by one of the excellent guys. And she told a story that one person managed to flee, to run away. It was a youngster. They asked for permission to go and bathe, and she didn't go back. And since then, they closed. Nobody ran away anymore from there. Nobody escaped. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.